The history of unpunished violence against our people clearly indicates that we must be prepared to defend ourselves, or we will continue to be a defenseless people at the mercy of a ruthless and violent racist mob.
My name is Jeffrey DeBrose, and I'm here to speak on the false criminality of the black communities in New York City. When you take a look at the New York City prison system, you see a prison system that is overpopulated with black representation. This is no coincidence. History shows us that mistreatment of black communities have been backed by law and has been backed by society. This has a detrimental impact on the black communities of New York City. When we talk about individual effect, we talk about self-fulfilling prophecies. We talk about black Americans in New York City that hold stock in their criminal image to the world. Historically speaking, we have been perceived by the world as criminally inclined and mischievous, enemies to the state. These perceptions have helped to perpetuate mistreatment by the police department and little to no recourse by our government. In fact, many of our societies are a direct result of years and years of mistreatment. When you talk to black mothers, you speak to mothers who are fearful of their black children being released out into a world where perhaps they may not come home that night. Most of these communities lack a structured home. They lack both parents. Sometimes they may have no parents. These are not natural courses for this race. These are systemic implications of the government used to dismantle the home and the core values of the black communities. What's so important about this disenfranchised group is that generations will absorb these ideas of black people being criminals, black people being mischievous, black people being no good, and black people never being successful. And that perpetuation creates generations upon generations of oppressed people with the inability to evolve as a unit. It's easy to believe that the misrepresentation of the black community in the prison system is true. But when you take a look at the numbers, you'll find that the discrepancies cannot be ignored. The population of New York City alone holds 42% white people and 24% blacks, in addition to other races. But when you look at the numbers found in the reports for the New York City criminal activity per 2019, you find that 60% of heinous crimes qualified as manslaughter, and murder are in fact related to Black Americans, specifically in the New York City area. The false narratives throughout history to implicate Black people in crime has succeeded in creating a global image of the Black community. This image leaves us vulnerable to brutality. Families are losing their loved ones at a staggering rate, whether they be murdered or simply incarcerated for the rest of their lives, with no hopes of coming back into society. This vastly affects the public health of our Black communities in New York City, many of which are recorded to die prior to their 25th birthday. This is a public emergency. Individuals in these communities are affected, as well as communities as a whole. On the individual side, the silencing of Blacks in positions of power and the narration of Black criminality creates a self-fulfilling prophecy inflicted on the individual within the community. This individual lives a life of fulfillment, living a life perceived as a criminal, while attempting to integrate himself in society that has no means of allowing integration. The sociological and psychological impact on this individual cannot be measured. Oftentimes, negative stress factors help to push these individuals towards negative coping factors, which may help to fulfill the narration of criminality placed upon them at birth. When you take a look at the community level, you find a machine that creates these products of society, these products of narration, these baby criminals. Oftentimes, these communities know nothing other than survival. They know nothing of success. They're blinded to representation of power. And in fact, sometimes even champion criminality as a sign of strength of the Black community. If we can overcome the law, then that must mean that we are strong. And in that struggle is where the confusion comes. Because in a community that's individually impacted one by one, year by year, children begin to grow up and reflect these negative ideas. And some are even perceived as criminals, when simply they're just the result of their community. For example, Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was perceived as a criminal because of a few things, but more importantly, because of the way he looked. The way he looked is a way that many Black Americans look. There's no importance about how he looked, but what's important is how that look is perceived to the world. If you see a young Black man in a hoodie, he must be trouble. If you see him walking down the street, he must be trouble. He cannot be anything other than trouble. Indeed, this is the narration created by the media, enforced by the media, and perpetuated by the self-fulfilling prophecies of all people involved. And in these self-fulfilling prophecies, and these false narrations of imagery, detriments of character, you find brutality being normalized as a result by the law enforcements that people deemed as protectors. Unfortunately, this is in fact just another result of the systemic racism established to prevent progress in the black community. When you take a look at organizations that have dedicated themselves on reversing this false imagery and trying to place blacks in position of power in order to break the mold, two organizations come to mind. The National Urban League, founded in 1910, is dedicated to supplying economic power and health to the marginalized black communities. This organization takes more of an individual approach, ensuring that individuals receive the resources needed to access good housing, good jobs, and good health care. These efforts are vital in ensuring that an individual can alter their behavior and thought process and overcome the global perception of criminality on their kind. Another organization that's vital in the fight against false is the NAACP. This organization fights against discrimination on a different level than individual. This organization focuses on a policy level, hoping to establish policy that will end discrimination based off race and promote equal rights for all. Neither of these organizations are more important than the other. Both aspects of assistance is vital in order to ensure that we stop discrimination based off race. I propose that a quota be set in order to ensure equal representation amongst government officials. And what I mean by this is, if you have a society consisting of a multitude of races, and you have a governing body of that particular society consisting of one signified race, one privileged race as a majority, you cannot expect. It is vital that the representation of each and every marginalized group in New York City have proper say in laws and policies for their own communities. It is not easy to understand the plight of another without living in their shoes. And as the government stands, the communities that they represent are not represented in their favor. I argue that until you have equal representation in government, as a community, it is impossible to receive fair treatment. The upstream effects of the misrepresentation in government usually leaves the misguided communities silenced and unable to defend themselves. If you take a look at the political climate of today, you find that oftentimes there are two white people fighting for the votes of all other races. This makes no sense. The agendas being pushed are not dedicated to these specific communities that are marginalized. They're generalized, oftentimes deceived by these politicians, trying to get their vote, trying to get over the hump of their white counterparts. But I say agendas need to be forced upon politicians. Votes need to be won. This is very, very important to me and to the Black community. Until we are able to represent ourselves in the positions of power that we deserve, the world will never perceive us as so. And if the world doesn't perceive us as so, then the mistreatment and the imbalance of the criminal justice system will persist.